So you're bored with regular push-ups and trying to find out some other variations to try and maybe include in your workout or just play around with. We have a list of over 20 options for you, and this is a non-exclusive list. So if you do like this one, go ahead and comment below and let me know if you want a part 2. First, we're going to talk about the standard push-up. We did just do a couple weeks ago a separate video on this, but we'll just quickly review. Basically, stomach is tight, elbows are at about 45 degrees out to the side, maybe about 30, and this is just getting a good general upper body exercise, workout for the chest and some triceps as well. But if you want to bias your triceps a little bit more, go ahead and bring your elbows in just a little bit more to the sides. And that is that first variation there for a tricep push-up. And then we do have a diamond push-up, which just narrows the stance a little bit with the hands, still biases the triceps compared to a standard push-up, but also gets the chest a little bit and is a little bit more challenging than that tricep push-up. So coming here, elbows are in, and then coming up, keeping those hands together. You can rotate down just a little bit, so it's not necessarily a perfect triangle or diamond if you wanted to. Then we have the wide grip push-up, which is going to bias the chest a little bit more compared to a standard push-up. And again, elbows are at about 30 to 45 degrees out to the side, because if they're straight out to the arms, that just puts a little bit more stress on the shoulders. And again, we chatted about this one in that push-up video from a couple weeks ago. We have a few other variations that Laura's going to demonstrate next, because these are ones that she likes to do a little bit more than me. So the slider triceps push-up. As I said, I don't do these ones as much, but Laura likes to include them. You actually slide onto your elbows or forearms at the bottom position and then slide back. She'll show you from the 2 different angles just to make it a little bit easier, as it is a little bit more of a complex motion. This will kind of help if you're trying to progress to different things in the calisthenics world. This is a nice easy way to kind of start to transition the weight shifts. And it's like for like a zombie press or something like that, where you're pulling it down and then pushing up from there. This is a great one to start to work that strength. Next, she's going to show a push-up to pike up slider. So as mentioned, Laura likes to do her sliders. In this case, it's just kind of when you're at the top, you just bring your feet towards your hands, really just working on your core engagement a little bit at the top. Important note here is just to make sure you reset to a neutral spine before you go down into your push-up. Don't keep your back rounded too much. So this can actually be a really good one for realizing a nice neutral spine, as when you are in that overly flexed position. So this is possibly one that, if you're not really sure if you're doing it right, really helps to have a side angle. So you can always set up your phone off to the side just to kind of make sure you're doing it right. And it does require a little bit more hamstring mobility. And it's again also great for those zombie press handstands, or just getting the shoulders stacked over the hands for more handstand work. And next we're going to do dive bomber push-ups. Personally, have never done these before. Another reason why she's demonstrating these ones. But this one is kind of good in terms of working your shoulder mobility overhead a little bit, your lumbar spine, and then just kind of teaching that weight shift forwards. I honestly like it more as a warm-up or a mobility exercise, because you're really getting some hamstring stretch in that downward dog position that you're starting with. Again, like Steve said, the overhead mobility and also the spine mobility there too. So I like to use that one more as a warm-up or mobility exercise. You can also add a band, or you don't necessarily have to do a band to add a little bit more thoracic motion and or scapular stability work with the band rotations. So you can do this again with or without the band. The band just adds a little bit more resistance for that scapular stability. So you're going up and then going into a push-up and then switching. So you're just getting a little bit more core control with that rotation and the balance on that one hand, and also that scapular retraction with the band, pinching that shoulder blade back. Yep, and with the plant hand, make sure you're still actively pushing into the ground and not as you're raising up with the other arm. Make sure you're not just sinking in here. Make sure you're actively pushing away, just to make sure that you're kind of cueing it properly. And then you can also do a push-up on a band. So you can set up a band in your squat rack. So you want to use a pretty heavy band for this one, and then you can just put your hands on the band. So coming here, and I'll probably hook up two for Steve, just because he's a little bit heavier than I am. So essentially you are going up into a push-up, and then coming back up, and it's gonna challenge that shoulder stability a little bit more, and it's also gonna really work your core as well. So make sure you use a heavy band so it doesn't actually hit the ground as well. Before you go into your push-up,
actively push it down first. So don't just kind of start the second you get their hands there. Push it down and then try to start your push-up from there. And it'll make it a little bit easier.
Yeah, basically set in that push-up position first and then go from there. And then you can also do a pseudo planche push-up, basically the reversed grip, and you're letting your shoulders come past your elbows, and this works your biceps and your chest a little bit more. So again, making sure that stomach stays tight and the back stays flat so it's not arching there. And then you can make this a little bit harder by elevating your feet on something. The higher up it's elevated, the harder it's going to be. The lower down, the easier it's going to be. So again, coming there and then coming back up, trying to keep your back flat there. And then you can also just do a standard foot elevated push-up, which is just going to progress the push-up a little bit more. If you don't have weights or anything like that, you can just do a standard elevated push-up.
So there are a few variations you can use with the stability ball as well. Laura's going to show first with the feet on there. This is a very simple intro to having an unstable surface and trying to control it, because when you'll see with the next one, when your hand's on the ball, it might be a little bit more shaky. It does require some core engagement here. It's very common from my experience that people almost immediately start to sink their waist down too far. So really make sure you're being active with keeping your core engaged here as you're trying to go downwards. You'll see this way, probably a little bit more shaky with your arms. But to me, this one, it's probably not quite as hard as it looks, as long as the ball is inflated properly, which probably doesn't matter as much with the other one. But with this one, you really need to make sure that the physio ball is inflated properly. Next, she's going to show the feet on the ball with a little bit of a rotation. So you'll see this one requires a little bit more frontal plane or side-to-side stability. Definitely requires the leg working a little bit more to stabilize yourself and your hips. Still, again, actively pressing down into the floor with your planted arm as you rotate. After that, we're going to do a push-up to pike or a pike push-up. So just a push-up, and then you see with the ball coming forward, it's kind of similar to what we were doing before, but in this case, she's actually going to do a push-up at the top of the motion as opposed to before when she was demonstrating just bringing the knees towards your chest. With the ball elevating you up a little bit more, it does allow the pike to be a little bit more challenging, whereas if you're just doing it on the flat ground, you really can't move too far because of your head.
Yeah, and basically you can get your hips a little higher so it simulates the pike push-up a little bit more, and then on the unstable surface, it requires just more core work and more balancing on the hands too.
Let's go to scorpion push-ups, gonna be next. You'll see that the heel goes towards the opposite side as you do this. Not too much of a crazy change up top. This one will make your back pop evidently sometimes. But this is just kind of incorporating a little bit of an anti-rotation while you're up top, while you are rotating down below. So kind of a bit of a mobility one to add in if you want to. Probably not so much of a strength training one that people do regularly or focus primarily and only on strength training. Probably trying to blend the two between mobility and strength with this one.
And this one also, as you twist, you're going to have more weight on one side. So it's going to work that chest a little bit more. So it's can potentially be used as a progression towards a one-arm push-up if you wanted to, or just to progress the push-up a little bit more while you're working on some back mobility too.
So next is going to be a typewriter push-up, which is definitely a progression towards a single arm one. So you'll actually transition sides while you're at the bottom. You see that you do want to try to lock out the elbow on the opposite side. You can transition side to side. Clearly you see her hands are spread out a lot wider, and you see her hands also start out like this to make it a little bit easier on your shoulder as you transition from side to side. Yeah. Just creates a little bit more space, and it's a lot easier on your wrists that way.
And with that typewriter, make sure you are pushing actively into the ground as you're shifting from side to side and as you're over on that one side, instead of relying on your joints to passively just stay in that position. Make sure you're actively pushing, because that way you're going to get the benefit of the exercise. And then another way to progress this one is with an archer push-up. So hands are going to be pretty wide with this one, and instead of staying down in between each rep, you're going to come back up into the push-up position. So you're going to go over to one side and then coming back up and then over to the other side. And so this biases your chest a little bit more, not only on the arm that's working, but also on the arm that's pushing into the ground. So it's basically increasing your lever arm and making this pec work as well, while you're also pushing with that hand. So this one's a pretty challenging one and a great one to progress to one-arm push-ups. And then to progress this more, we are going to be doing a planche push-up, or Steve is going to be doing a planche push-up. This requires a lot more balance from the shoulders and a lot more shoulder stability and strength because you are not using your feet at all. So you do need to make sure you have a planche just still before you try these because it does require that balance, and then you're doing a push-up in that position. So you can start with in a tuck position like Steve is about to do here, keeping the hips up even with the shoulders, so ideally up a little bit higher as well.
I've done a lot. It's about the 30 or 40 is what I've done so far today.
So ideally keeping the hips even with the shoulders. You can start with a tuck position and then you can even progress to a straddle or doing a straight planche position or with a band. So you can always loop a band overhead and hook that around your hips, and that way it'll help support you and help with that balance too. So next we're going to do a one-arm push-up. So again, just a regular push-up, but on one arm. So you are going to have to shift over to that side. And I personally like to keep my elbow in a little bit closer with this when I do them, just because it helps with that shoulder stability. So there, and you can widen the feet a little bit as well to help with balance.
Hi, do you ever do it with like the opposite leg up?
You can also do it with the opposite leg up too. So you can do opposite arm, opposite leg, and that adds a little bit more core stability. So not only are you doubling the weight on that one arm with that one arm push-up, you're also adding the balance component too, which requires more core stability. And that's like a little bit of anti-rotation core stability and also the anti-extension. So basically like no twisting and no dropping the hips.
So next we're going to do a handful of pike push-up variations. So for starters, just the feet on the ground. This one, not that great of a motion in terms of what you can do just because of your head hitting the ground if you maintain your form, but it's still very effective for training what you're looking for, especially if you're working on the end range towards a handstand, for example, or anything that involves kind of locking your arm out overhead.
It also does bias your triceps a little bit more than a regular push-up too, and also working that overhead pushing motion.
Next, you're going to show with the feet elevated. And you'll see this will kind of create ideally a little bit closer of a straight line when you're at the top portion of the motion. And then she's going to show you next with the parallettes. So here's some strong blocks. And you'll see with this you have a lot better ability to get that extra little bit of motion. This can make it a little bit harder as well, obviously.
And then you also want to make sure your hips are as close over your head as you can too. And that's going to depend on the height and your hamstring flexibility too.
To progress that and make it a little bit harder, you can raise your one leg up. It'll shift your center of mass a little bit more over your hands and shoulders. It also gets rid of a little bit of the support that your legs are providing, so it increases the mass that you have to push with as well. So this one is definitely one that you can work towards, and definitely helps a little bit more being specific to the position you're with a handstand if you don't have it yet. Next, Laura's going to try a handstand push-up. So in this case, feet supported. Personal opinion, if you can have a smooth surface, it's a lot easier. But that's for if you don't want to worry about the balance as much as a full handstand push-up, but still want to work the strength required. Definitely, even if you can do a real handstand push-up, this is a great way to get a few more repetitions and get that strength up and the endurance a little bit better.
Do keep in mind though that the angle of the body is going to change when you're doing that handstand push-up, because as you're doing the handstand push-up, the head is going to come down in front of you versus where your back is against the wall, you're going to be a little bit more in that arch position, if that makes sense.
So another way you can do is you can just work the slow lowering or partial repetitions with the handstand push-up. It's still helpful. Laura can't quite do it all the way down just yet. But at the same time, just the minimal motion there is enough. If you are starting to lose your handstand a little bit, to kind of work on that auto correction while incorporating the balance component, as opposed to when your feet are up against the wall. So while the range of motion might be a little bit less, the balance component is definitely a little bit more specific to what you're trying to do, because you do have to really work on that active lockout in order to maintain your balance on the top of a handstand.
But if you did like this and want more variations, go ahead and let me know below, and we can definitely create a part 2 for you, because I definitely had a lot of other ideas for this one. So including some like more plyo push-ups, using some different equipment and things like that. So let me know below, and I will see you guys in the next one. The bands and not tripping over them. So again, elbows are still at that 30.
There's Derrick Henry was doing like workouts like that a lot for his like pre-workout, not pre-workout, off-season programs.
Oh. And you're going into that push-up. Steve is now terrified and doing it on his knees.
I still think this needs a heavier one.
It's gonna give.
Yeah, it's giving a lot.
See? It's fine.